All right. Now, this question I get asked all the time, which is, where should I be writing online? Here's the truth. There is no one great, forever winner of where you should be writing online. The best place to write online in 2005 was not the best place to write online in 2009, was not the best place to write online in 2012, and so on. The game of online writing is constantly changing because it's a technology game, right? So every time a new platform comes out, every time someone finds a new way to write and distribute content, all of a sudden some part of the game changes. And so the idea here, and why I stress so much in everything that we talk about, is I don't want to just tell you the answer, right? Because that's not helpful, because whatever answer I tell you today is not going to be the answer that remains true tomorrow, 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, right? Because the game's always changing. So what I would rather do is show you how to think about it. And then as the game continues to change, you can discern for yourself, what do I want to do here? And obviously, like being part of communities like this, we'll always share, hey, finger on the pulse. Hey, here's where I think things are working best right now. But I think it's important to learn how to think about the game, not just here's the answer, right? So here's a list of a bunch of the online writing platforms that exist today. Obviously, the primary that we use in Ship 30 for 30 is Twitter. I talk about Quora all the time. I continue to think it's one of the most undervalued writing platforms on the internet. Most people don't know Quora has 300 million users. It's a massive site. Because the site is a question answer platform, it does a pretty incredible job of matching the type of content that you're writing with the type of people who want to read it, right? Because that's the whole idea of question and answer. So there's a little bit of an advantage for you to exploit there as a writer. Medium, another really interesting platform, very up and down. Again, the game's always changing, right? There are some 6-month periods where I believe Medium is like really on the verge of creating something special and great for writers. In the past, there have been moments where I've kind of equated it to maybe the Spotify for writing. And then there's other periods where they really drop the ball. And then for those 6 months or that year, I'm like, this isn't really a great investment right now. So again, like a lot of this decision-making is around just where do I want to write and how can I make the most out of it while kind of keeping a long-term lens. And that long-term lens that I always share is focus on the library, right? The platform is always going to change. What's not going to change is your library of content. So if you spend a year writing on Quora and then the next year writing on Medium, and then the next year a new platform comes out, the platform is a little irrelevant because you have the library that you wrote on Quora, you have the library you wrote on Medium, and you can just take that library, copy paste it, and bring it to the next platform. Most people don't know you can even do that, okay? So we're going to talk about how to take your content and not just republish it in a bunch of different places, but then how to use that republishing process to gather a bunch of different data points and learn what are readers gravitating to. But going back to the question of, okay, so where should I be writing? So we talk about Twitter. Quora is great for question answer. I've seen fiction on here, but primarily nonfiction, right? Because it is typically a literal question and then a literal answer. But stories perform extremely well on Quora. So you can toe that line, right, of I'm going to tell you the story and then answer your question. But I have seen people do that with fiction as well. Medium, I've seen both nonfiction and fiction. It does lean heavily nonfiction, lots of self-help, personal development, and then kind of some like technology niches in there, startup advice, very popular on Medium. Wattpad, most people don't know about, is actually a really interesting platform for fiction writers. It leans younger teen romance type of stuff, but the platform is growing like crazy, and there are tons of other categories. So yeah, if you're not into that, right, even though that's probably the first thing you're going to see when you get there, because that's like a big chunk of the reader base, there are other niche communities on there as well. The reason why I think Wattpad is worth paying attention to if you're interested in fiction is because they were really the first platform to kind of come up with gamifying reading stories. They were like, hey, instead of going on Amazon and buying a bunch of books or buying a bunch of ebooks, can you read ebooks sequentially, chapter by chapter on a platform? And now they've kind of put out, again, gamification, being able to give writers tokens and payment for how many pages get read, which is kind of a newer business model that's emerging on the internet. So if you're interested in writing stories, at a minimum, you should know that Wattpad exists. LinkedIn obviously leans very heavy business content, but is a great republishing platform if you have a LinkedIn profile and you kind of want to build a library there to say, hey, these are the things that I write. Reddit, people talk about it all the time. Technically, it's an online writing platform. I think that's the hardest platform out there in order to approach from a writing perspective, because it's just such a different type of community. I wouldn't really recommend that as a top platform, but if you're there and if you're a subreddit lurker and you really get that world, then I encourage you to play with it. Newsbreak is kind of an interesting, it's like another publication type of thing. Think like New Age HuffPost, where anyone can write and publish stuff there. There's nothing there to me that seems super interesting yet, but a lot of writers talk about it, so I think it's worth mentioning. Substack, newsletters, technically online writing platform, but also technically not, because the definition that I use for online writing platforms is that it's not just on the internet, but it's connected to a distribution mechanism, right? So Twitter, Quora, Medium, LinkedIn, Wattpad, right? When you write something, the platform is working to distribute the content to readers. With Substack, there is no distribution mechanism. In order to get people to read your newsletter, you have to tell them about your newsletter on one of these other platforms. So because it doesn't have that distribution mechanism, when writers ask, like, should I write on Quora or should I start a Substack? To me, they're not comparable, right? They're two completely different things, because one, you're attracting attention, right? And then the other, Substack, you're diverting the attention and sending it somewhere else. So Substack, I'm mentioning here because it's becoming more and more popular, but this is more of a step 2. This is not a step 1. And then I also put, Facebook technically is an online writing platform. You see a lot of people writing long form Facebook status updates. Yelp, if you're interested in food, if you're a foodie, right? If you're a restaurateur, if you're a chef, I've seen some really interesting case studies come out of Yelp where writers go and creatively give restaurant reviews, creatively give food reviews, and that leads to, right, data points, audiences, credibility, and the next thing you know, you've got someone who writes hilarious or interesting or super descriptive restaurant reviews or food reviews, and then they're like, well, here's my cookbook. Right? It's the same thing. It's a online writing platform with other users that you're tapping into who give you feedback in the form of data points that you can then learn from and double down on, which then leads to longer and longer forms of writing. And then Amazon is the last one, because technically as well, all of these principles hold true if you're, say, a fiction writer. This is very popular in fiction writing. If you're a fiction writer and you go, I'm going to write a bunch of different fiction stories, I'm going to put them up as ebooks, and I'm going to sell them on Amazon. I'm actually kind of testing the same thing in nonfiction, kind of taking my personal development articles and expanding them into short, quick reads. So technically you can treat Amazon the same way. The other thing that's important to note too is Amazon actually just launched for fiction writers a very similar mechanism that Wattpad has. Same thing, you can support writers directly with these tokens, and it's all through the Kindle, and it's a really interesting thing that I think is kind of emerging. So if you're interested in fiction, you should know about it, but these platforms are still really early too. So I think you're probably better off using something like a Twitter or a Medium or even a Quora to share stories and to gather data points faster there. The last question that I think is really important, right, is so which one is right for me, and should I do more than one at the same time? How do I think about that? My personal point of view on this is start with one. Do one for a while. Learn what works, learn what doesn't. Try to understand what about the platform is working for you. And then after you've given it a fair shot, right? And a fair shot isn't a week or sometimes even a month. I mean, I would stick with a platform for at least 6 months and really dig into it. And the reason why is because it's not going to be wasted time. You're going to learn a lot about how these platforms work, and they all work in very similar ways. And so once you learn one and you can really get into that community there, it's going to be way easier for you to translate those skills to somewhere else. Then if you want to do that, then I recommend adding in a second, but there's no purpose. I really think that it's almost like once you cross a certain point, the reward tapers off. Don't try and be everywhere here. That's everyone's impulse is I need to create 10 different profiles on 10 different platforms. And it ends up just creating a lot of unnecessary work for you. The only time that I think it might be worth playing with a couple platforms is, maybe pick 3 or 4 and treat them purely as republishing, purely. Okay. So you're not opening 4 different apps or opening 4 different browsers and platforms 8 times a day, right? And you're checking comments on Twitter, and then you're commenting on Quora, and then you're commenting on Medium. Then that becomes a full-time job. And I don't think that is productive in the long term. Instead, it's a lot better to treat one platform as your primary, right? So treat Twitter as your primary, or treat Medium as your primary, whatever it is. And then over time, if you want to republish your work, just copy paste it, put it somewhere else, and then spend all your time engaging on your primary. And again, this isn't a universal rule. It's just after a lot of years of experimenting, I found that to be really effective. And then, of course, if you're a business owner, if you can kind of rationalize your writing online having benefit to your business, and you kind of look at it like a hireable expense, then go with a personal assistant or hire a social media manager, whatever it is. And then now you have a little bit more scale to play with, right? Now someone else can help carry the burden a bit. But if you're not going to do that, treat one platform as your primary, maybe expand to a second in terms of republishing, and then maybe a third or a fourth for republishing. But don't feel like you need to keep up with the swamp of engagement on each one, because it just gets to be too much. So I hope that this really helps, because this question is something that I get all the time. Where should I be writing? What's most beneficial? The best answer that I can give you is to spend some time poking around on each platform. So maybe sometime this week, take an hour and just explore, search keywords on Quora, search keywords on Medium, go on LinkedIn and see if anyone's writing about the same things that you are. You just spend some time poking around these platforms, and you'll start to notice patterns emerge. You'll start to notice what the community's like. And then it's honestly not to overcomplicate it, right? You just pick one and stick with it. And there's something about that you're eliminating the noise, and you're just making it a lot easier for you to move productively forward. So in some of the videos to follow, I'm going to share with you kind of just the basics on Quora, Medium, and LinkedIn. I more and more am seeing Twitter as the primary right now. I think they're doing some really interesting things in the just creator space in general. They also just acquired a long form article platform. So we're going to see that feature come to Twitter soon here. And similarly, the more that Twitter plays with these new features, the more creators are just going to want to be there, period. And they have the largest reader base out of all of these. I mean, Quora has 300 million users. Twitter's got probably 650 million, 700 million plus at this point. So I like treating Twitter as the primary. That's not to say that these others don't have potential. I mean, for context, I've seen 19-year-old writers come out of Wattpad with 7-figure, 6-figure book deals leading to movie deals off the stories that they wrote online for free, right? Like, I've seen Quora answers go crazy viral. I'm pretty sure that I might be mixing this up with another book, but it was either The Martian or some other story emerged as a Quora answer. Someone asked something like, "What's it like to live on Mars?" And the person wrote this really extensive answer of what they imagined life on Mars being like, and the thing went crazy viral and led to a huge book deal and then the movie came out, right? So crazy success stories can happen on every platform. And that's why the question of which one is the best is a tiny bit flawed, because all of them have benefits. It's really about which one are you treating as your primary and which one are you staying consistent with over the long term.